Rorschach issue 5. Tom King writing, Jorge Fornes on the art. Isn't it nice to talk about a good book? I feel like I've just talked about some books I didn't like, so I'm happy to talk about Rorschach. Quite a bit, in fact. So this is kind of a check-in issue, because this is the investigator going back to the governor who's running for president, Turley. And also Turley's like right-hand man, who's the one who hired him in the first place, who kind of bookends the issue because he's in the bar with him saying, hey, you're going to go meet him, tell him this, tell him that, but don't mention this. And we find out that Turley's convinced that Redford is behind this assassination attempt, and he's not hearing anything else to the contrary, even though the investigator's like, I've not found anything that even suggests that. I mean, it's not impossible, but everything's suggesting it's just that these wild cards.
It's these two.
Yeah.
It's this girl that, acted alone and has tricked other guys into going along with their schemes in the past.
And there was some wonderful thematic stuff in this issue. I mean, because I think inherently this one might not be as exciting as the last couple, because the last couple were so focused in like these chapters of this girl's life.
So this one is a breather issue almost, where we get character time with our investigator. Because I feel like I know him even better now, and Turley.
I was gonna say both him and Turley equally. I think Turley more than ever feels like a complete shitbag. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a panel in this where he refers to Nixon as a good guy, and which probably tells you all you need to know. But his entire attitude and the way he talks about things and the way he talks about people and talks about the comedian, with the fact that he's got a giant like comedian button and a painting in a frame above his desk.
Definitely a familiar figure, if you look. But it also, to me, it goes into kind of like, right, he's talking about how Redford has destroyed the country by adding Vietnam as a state, and that's kind of what's kept Redford in the presidency. Although, is it really? Because all we've seen now is that, in that city where the investigator, which I forget his name, I should know the main character's name, but I feel like it doesn't get said.
And it never gets brought up, because I don't know either. I think it's just because it never gets brought up. I mean, maybe it got brought up in the first issue, but I don't think I've heard it since.
Yeah, so when he goes to that diner, right, and 2 issues ago, and they talk about, are you one of the good ones or whatever? Are you good and American? And what that means. And you can see, like, there's that sentiment through the country, but it's really coming from Turley. Like, this is what he's kind of weaponizing.
I think one of the things we have to keep in mind with all this is that the only perspective we're getting for Redford and Redford's presidency and what the country is like under Redford is only coming from this extreme right-wing point of view. We never hear it from anyone else. I mean, our main character, investigator, feels quite neutral, and he almost feels like he's silently judging when he hears certain things, or he's not as quick to jump to certain things. But, Turley, his right-hand man, even the waitress in the diner from a couple issues ago, we keep hearing these very extreme views talking about Redford and what he's done to the country. We've never actually seen anyone else on Redford's side trying to justify or explain their point of view.
No, it's very much one-pointed. But through that and through him being neutral, you're getting revealed of kind of the temperature of things. And even just like Turley kind of represents this almost like descendant of the comedian, right? Where the comedian kind of represents this toxic like view of almost like, I don't want to say imperialism or colonialism, but like he represents the United States in Vietnam, right? And he's just killing fools. The way that Turley talks about his one time he met him, he took out an entire beach of people, and, Turley got him out of there, and he's just so revered. And you see the investigator just kind of listening, being like, is this the same comedian that we're familiar with? So like the public or even the investigator has a different view of the comedian than what Turley does. And it's almost how like the right wing kind of looks at strongman figures, and they're the only ones that are right.
And just on that point, like this flashback where we see Turley as a younger guy in Vietnam, because they mentioned early on that he's a vet, and this is where he's a vet from. And he, we see this scene of him like just mowing down people on a beach, trying to like cover fire for the comedian as he's trying to save this POW or whatever she is. Yeah.
Right.
There's a scene earlier on in the issue when the investigator comes to see Turley. There's a guard outside who insists on patting him down, and he's like really stern. He's like, "I'm going to pat you down," blah blah blah. And the investigator's like, "Hey, I've been trying to contact you because you were there. You were part of the Secret Service that took down the two culprits on the night." And we get like a sort of flashback to the moment. And we've seen this moment before, just from a different perspective. But we get just the panels focusing on this investigator where he very coldly just ejects his magazine and reloads his gun and then like empties his
fires away.
Yeah. Like, he's already shot at least one of them, and he empties his clip and very calmly. And I thought there was a parallel between this and the way he's just making sure he mows down whatever he can. There's no thought process. There's no yelling to stop.
It's
just
pointed.
Yeah, it's just point and shoot as quickly as possible.
Well, and there's intent there, right? It's not to stop the people that shot at Turley. It's to absolutely murder that person.
Yeah.
Right? Just like with Turley, it wasn't the point of saving the comedian, right? We know the comedian can handle himself, but it was the fact that he was almost killing people just to do it, and that's the type of person, of course, that would look up to the comedian.
Yeah,
and that's the type of person that's going to rise up against Redford.
The comedian even says, I know how many you killed, not enough.
Yeah.
Like, they laugh it off. They both think that's really funny. It's they're peas in a pod.
Right, and it's this toxic machismo that pervades the right wing,
Turley's literally having a shit when the investigator comes in.
When he shows up and he's just telling him to like deal with it, and like there's this like bravado there. You're like, dude, you're just gross. What are you doing? And just also that he says that he went through six metal detectors, and they still intent on checking him. So like, just how paranoid is this always how paranoid Turley is? Or is
they pat him down when he leaves as well because he might have taken something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it shows just how deep that they'll like this one guy wants to believe like, oh yeah, Redford's having me killed. Because they even asked the investigator as he leaves, did he bring him up? And no matter what, that's going to be the line going forward.
Yeah, it's that
Redford tried to have him killed, and there's zero evidence for that.
Yeah, the aide who sees him in the bar again at the end of the issue, and that's when he asks, did he bring up Redford? And of course he did, but the investigator lies and says no. Just to go back to the flashback, like another thing is like when a comedian's saying, "Hey, like, do you want to know exactly how many you killed?" Right. He's like, "Yeah, sure." It's like, "You sure you want to know? You want to know like how many bodies are in?" We get really dark panels of like children like dragging in the dead bodies of all these people that were killed by Turley. He's like, "Hell yeah, I want to know. I do want to know."
It's almost like, well, who's worse, right? We know the comedian, this weighs on his shoulders, right? Because of what we've read in Watchmen and other things. But he had to learn to accept that. And with this guy, he doesn't seem to care. He doesn't carry that burden. So it's almost like the generation that gave birth to him, they're even worse now.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we go to him, like after the comedian says not enough, we cut to him sitting in his fancy chair in his expensive suit, just laughing his ass off. Yeah. He comes across as truly disgusting, honestly, in this issue. Again,
without going into strict details, it reminded me of a certain politician, like just his whole vibe of it. Although this guy is actually a vet and actually did things, and unlike other ones. But there's a certain type of politician that wants to weaponize like might is right, even though they have little to no backing of it themselves. They don't know what it's actually like. Whereas Turley, I feel, does know, and that almost makes him worse because he knows what that weight is of war, and he doesn't seem to care. Because I have the feeling too that you get to the end, they talk about like Man and Superman, and it was Manhattan and Comedian. Like before he left, he saw them, on the streets of Vietnam and whatnot. But the way that he talks about it, it almost is like he's more glorifying the Comedian as the Superman, almost as if he's
because he even jokes and says, don't ask which one's which.
Right. That because he is like the personification of war, right? Versus Manhattan, I think the personification of
I think part of it, and in the same way that like the Watchmen TV show took the idea that people inspired by Rorschach's journal were this extremist group who were essentially terrorists. The idea that, same here with Comedian, is that when you have characters who have a bit more nuance, and you have these people with more nuance, when they sort of symbolize themselves in a certain way, kind of like what you were saying earlier on, is that the next generation who's inspired by them almost just takes the caricature of it and doesn't read into the nuance of it, and just takes the cold, hard side of it, and it almost becomes like almost just even purer to what the core thing was, which in this case is, Comedian was a bastard, but he had some awareness that he was a bastard to a certain point.
He knew what the price of that was, right? Because when we see his final moments, he's all alone, right? And he's past his prime and whatnot. He knew what that sowed, but it's almost like this new generation's like, yeah, but that won't be me. And, there's a different edge to it, and that's when he's sitting there, that's the last thing he sees is the man and the Superman. And then he comes back and that dude goes from a vet and whatever his thing is, or he ends up becoming a governor, right? And it's just like, that's kind of dangerous. Someone with that mentality giving levers of power. And so you look at the investigator with now, when he leaves, the final page is he's almost walking in step with the memory of what's her name? I forget what the kid.
But before we get there, we have to. There's a speech we have to talk about before, because that last page is important, but it's important because of the setup.
Okay, go ahead.
Because notably, it's when he's still talking to Turley, and Turley's talking about people who put on masks, and he talks about how the two people who tried to kill him, no one was going to see them do it. They were up in the rafters, but they still put on the mask. So the masks weren't about hiding their identity. It was about doing it wearing the mask. It was about being those personas. And we know that she maybe convinced the old guy that he was Rorschach. He was, Rorschach's spirit was in him, and blah blah blah. Because we've seen her do that to someone else before, and that's the assumption, at least for now. And it's and it talks about thinking that, and as he's saying this, we see them sort of standing out in the rain, which is relevant for the final page because that's where we ultimately see them at the end.
Right.
They're not really there. It's more of a metaphorical thing. But he talks about the investigator and how he has this look on his face. Now you don't have a mask on you, but the way you kind of the way you said you didn't see any evidence for Redford's involvement and you're looking into it, it sort of says that you have this kind of desire to find the truth. It kind of reminds him of people who put on masks. This idea of like no matter what, getting to the bottom of it, and that some people don't need masks, and he's looking at the investigator and saying you're one of these people who don't need masks. And I mean, just to read some of this dialogue here at the bottom of this page, because again, it kind of focuses on the kid, right, the girl, and it says, "You'll find the truth. I've got confidence that I do. I think you have great potential. I'm good at seeing potential. I can look at a man and see what a lot of people don't. A lot of people see the same thing, but what I see in you, no one sees it but me." And I think the idea that he thinks he's comparing him to the Comedian in this moment, that he's sort of recognizing that special thing in him that he saw in the Comedian back in Vietnam. And I think the ending, so he leaves, he meets Alan the aide, and one of the other things as well before he goes is that he starts smoking, and he says to the investigator, "Don't say this to anyone, because if anyone knows, I'll have to answer questions about this bad habit. But you have to hide some things when you're trying to show yourself as a better version of yourself. You're trying to be the best version of yourself. You have to hide some things about you." And it got me thinking about the main character. It got me thinking about the investigator. And there's a moment where the guy pats him down again on the way out, and he's like, "Hey, you've got an attitude. You're hiding it quite well. You're good at keeping calm, but I can kind of tell that you've got an attitude, and an attitude's not a good thing to have." And he's like, "Do you want to hit me?" And the investigator turns around and says, "No, but if you want me to hit you, I'll see what I can do." And I think it's kind of seeding this idea that this investigator, and I don't know if it's going to go full out and say that he becomes a new Rorschach by the end, but
he has more in common with the idea of Rorschach from here, right? Of the kid who is kind of weaponizing that whole squid thing and preying on susceptible people, right? Whereas this guy sees things in shades of gray. It's not that black and white again, which has been a theme in so far every issue.
Oh, and who thinks what? I'm confused. That you...
So the investigator, right?
Yes.
He has more in common with Rorschach than he does in the kid, right? And her whole thing, right, where she's weaponized the idea that the squids are taking over, right, from her dad.
The investigator has stuff in common with her?
Right. Is that there's more in common there because there's shades of gray. She understood those shades of gray, but she's weaponized them, right?
Okay.
And that's where he is. It's not just the straight black and white that Rorschach normally does. Because that's where Walter Kovacs was in his life. We've been over this in the other issues.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not so sure I get that point, but just the final page here is when he leaves the bar, and the Alan leaves first, there's a great sort of thing. There's a 9-panel grid here where the shot glass on the investigator's side is still sitting there, and the guy's trying to say, "Hey, you've got access to all the funds to hunt down whoever's behind this." Like, he's determined to find them. So did he bring up Redford? It's when he asks about Redford that he finally picks up the glass and says no. He takes a drink. And the last page of the book is he walks out in the street and it's pouring a rain. Just like earlier on, we saw a couple of panels of the kid and this new old man Rorschach. They were standing in the rain, and he walks out in the street and it's pouring a rain just like that. And as he walks down the street, Rorschach and the kid are walking behind him, just sort of side by side, almost laughing as he walks down the street. And the idea that they're kind of walking with them, and I don't know if this is necessarily suggesting that he's starting to kind of see why they did what they did, and he's starting to sort of see the evil that this man is, and that something needs to be done about it, and he's starting to understand, and that's why they're effectively, if you take this as their spirits internally laughing at him, that he's finally starting to catch on to kind of like that's like almost that if you believe metaphorically that Rorschach's spirit did pass on to someone else, that in some way, and it's not that literally his spirit is passed on into the investigator, but it's more that the idea of that this man is a problem and needs to be taken care of has almost started to seed its way into him, because he's met the man, he's heard how he talks, what his views are on things, and this visual at the end of the spirits, if you will, again, of the kid and Rorschach laughing as he's clearly learning who he's working for, and I don't think I think he's getting to the point where he's really starting to not feel comfortable about who he's working for, and that's when I go back to the Turley comparing him to people with masks. I think Turley's recognizing him and looking at him and saying, "Oh, this guy, he could be like a new comedian.
He's gonna be a problem,
right?" Yeah. Well, no. I don't think it could be a problem. In the moment, I don't think that's what he's saying. He's saying he could be the new comedian. He's saying he's recognizing in him what he thinks he saw in the comedian a long time ago, but in actual fact, he's becoming more like the opposite. He's becoming kind of more on the Rorschach side, where he's recognizing in you that you're the problem, Turley, and that ultimately he's going to be the mask that leads to his downfall, whether or not he ever actually literally puts on a mask or not.
Right. Well, and then so. Also, while working this out, it also goes in what we were talking about of that generation begetting a different generation, right? Whereas now through this investigation, it's almost like whether he wants to or not, the investigator's kind of becoming a Rorschach-like character, right? Like you just said. But it also fits in with that whole, where you talk about the nuance and whatnot. It plays it with that, but on this side, of it, and that's why at the end they're kind of walking. He's kind of walking in step because he understands what they were. Maybe not the full story, but he understands their side. And I don't know if I want to say he's outright becoming a Rorschach per se. I want to walk that back a little bit, because I do think he's not as. But just the idea that he's starting to maybe believe in what they were doing, or at least why they were doing it, and what the problem with Turley is that needs to be dealt with. And that's not to say that he's going to try and assassinate him. Maybe that's where the book's going to go eventually. He'll eventually be convinced enough to do that. But certainly, I think the idea of the seed of doubt and the seed of that there's something wrong with Turley
is kind of what's really planted here for him.
Definitely.
And I was kind of there in the first issue. When he was given the job, he did kind of feel like he wasn't a devout believer and supporter of Turley. He was just taking a job. This was just.
But he believed again, and this also goes down to the truth, right?
Yeah.
And that he believes in the truth, and the truth is black or white. But when you're sifting through it, you do have to go through the gray. And again, that's why I think Rorschach's such a great character for that, because that's who he was. It's that polar opposite. It's good or evil. Right, but life doesn't always work out that way. Right, to a fault.
Yeah.
And his job as an investigator, he has to figure that out. Of that there's more complexity going on here. It's like, again, I'm still getting caught up on the kid character and the whole squid thing. Like, does she actually still believe that? Is she just using that to? What's her vibe? You know what I mean? Like, how did she talk to this old man?
Yeah,
into going just as Rorschach. So
and you could also just read the ending of he's been pulled between the two viewpoints now to the point where it's not so much that he's becoming more on their side, it's more that he's seen enough from Turley now to not really it's not black and white anymore. So if you take the idea that whatever side's which color, but Turley's the white side, and then the idea of the villains trying to assassinate with the black side, now he's in this middle place where he's actually not sure which one is the right side to be on. Like, it's not that obvious anymore.
Well, there's that saying that there's three sides to every story: your side, their side, and the truth, right? Because you paint through your bias and whatnot. So who knows? It's King doing like this. Like you said, this issue's not as exciting, and it's more of a character piece on Turley and even the investigator as we start to peel that, but it's still so layered with different things.
I'm just another thought in this ending. Could it be that he's more like the Night Owl of this, and the idea that because Night Owl always kind of worked with Rorschach, right? That was kind of a thing in the Watchmen.
Partners.
And I do wonder if this idea that he's more like Night Owl was the more sensible one, the more balanced one. Well,
and again, he's just taking this job, and he's supposed to be impartial, right? As an investigator, you're not supposed to go in with a bias. You're supposed to go in hypothetically of this is what the evidence is, and this is what we have to build around. And he tries to give that to Turley, like, look, all the evidence just says these are just two lone wolves that don't like you, has nothing to do with Redford. But Turley can't accept that because in his own mind, no, Redford's trying to take me out because I'm too dangerous. And so yeah, maybe you're onto something, because he kind of does remind me of Night Owl in that way. He is like, love him or hate him, Rorschach has charisma, right? There's something that draws people to him as a character. That's why he's kind of a standout in Watchmen as a series and what they did with him on the TV show. And you kind of sometimes forget Night Owl even was there, but he's almost the main character of that book, if I remember right. Like, you follow him and Laurie throughout as and isn't he the one that pieces everything together?
It's kind of an even split, to be honest. Night Owl and Laurie is equal to Rorschach, which is equal to
Yeah, but now that you mentioned that, I can see the Night Owl comparison a lot better. He is kind of he's kind of stuck in between. So, but yeah, it's good. Fornes' art too. Like, for a lot of this, the action is there, but in a subtle way. Like, you never actually see, like, you see comedian running, but you don't see anybody actually gunned down. You see the aftermath, and that's a little bit even more haunting. Those pages definitely stuck with me. And then just Turley sitting there and looking menacing, like,
the giant button in the frame. Even the fact that what kind of like makes him leave, and the question, did he mention Redford? The idea of trying to turn it into this political two-sided thing. Right. He just lies and leaves, and he's walking in the rain. Like, the idea that this world has been caught up, he's just trying to solve an attempted murder, and it's becoming this political fight between two sides that he has no interest in necessarily, or if he does, he's keeping it very close to the chest as to. But certainly his reaction to the waitress a couple issues ago, and then kind of his reactions in this episode, his stoic, and then even the implication of the attitude that the guard says about him does kind of imply that he, at least in some level, disagrees with Turley's views.
Right.
and we're so disgusted by in this issue that it makes sense that he, in some level, is too. So I wonder, this is the sort of moment at the ending of this issue. I wonder, like, you know, after a few more issues, or even after the whole thing, like coming back and reading that again and reading this issue, I wonder if this ending takes on a new meaning or it becomes clearer based on where it goes throughout. But certainly a lot of juicy stuff to think about on its own right now. So yeah, and I think I put out like 5 different ideas in the space of like a minute there as I was talking about that last page.
It is one of those books that I was trying to piece together, and there's just so much at play here. Like, it is very, like, it's no wonder that King was a CIA agent and was able to juggle so many threads, right? Because you see all the stuff here. And
I think notably, it doesn't feel, it does feel like there's a plan behind it all. It does feel like he knows what he's doing, even though there's so much at play and there's so much going on. It never feels like...
It's not messy. Like, I'm never like, okay, having a hard time. I have a hard time not explaining it, but processing it sometimes. But if you guys go back, I've always had a hard time processing King stuff on here. You know, like, go back to watch the Mr. Miracle review from way back. You know, like that's just Tom King, I think. Although this one's a little bit more straightforward, I would say. There's a web almost. This book makes me the Charlie Day meme of you know, all the webs and stuff. So.
The themes are so rich. There's a lot of layers at play. And the fact that we're now sort of tying in like what our main character is feeling about all these things and what he's taking from it, without it actually just spelling it out completely clearly, adds a whole other bit of context to it. So I assume we're back to the investigation next issue and wherever he's going next to like find out, because he still mentions he has no idea why the old man's fingerprints match Kovacs.
Right.
You know, he doesn't know how she convinced him necessarily yet. So
the one thing that got me is like, what if she's right and Kovacs' spirit does jump into these people? Like, what if that's the twist at the end and we're like, holy crap, like, you know, like, I'm not necessarily betting on that's going to happen, but like, it definitely entered my mind when we got to that, like the fingerprints matching, and again, why him? And he was an artist, right? He did the Pontius Pirate book and stuff. So like, it's just, there's so much at play here now, but I really enjoyed this book.
Yeah. So again, the lesson I learned from this issue is that the comedian was a horrible influence on another generation of people. is the main thing I took from it. So yeah, what are you giving Rorschach issue 5?
I'm gonna give this an 8.5.
I'll give it 8.5. It's really maybe one that I even think of fondly when the whole thing's done, and if I read it again, maybe I'll even be more positive on it. But I don't love it as much as the last, like, say, 2 issues that were just, even the last 3 issues even.
Yeah. But yeah, we're bound to have like a catch your breath kind of deal where you have to reset some things. In a way,
it may be my least favorite issue so far, but that feels even like a really bad. Yeah, it feels like a really mean thing to say though, because I also think it's very rich in what it adds to the overall story. So it feels like a needlessly mean thing to say when it doesn't really apply.